Thanks, Jamie.
I'm just curious because I know, Gretchen, you do a great job and I'm sure you got the message out, and the same with you, Melissa and Kala. What would you do differently to try and, get that audience? Because it is a harder audience than our technical people. How do you target that?
We had some discussion about that afterwards in the Dover event, and whether it would be, say, connecting with Rotary or Chamber of Commerce or another civic organization that also might want to co-sponsor an event like this, and that has built audience and membership. Maybe partner with the Conservation Commission, hold it at, we had held a, Gretchen arranged a wonderful venue at a restaurant on the
Yeah, it was cool.
There was great food and, beverages and stuff, so that was great. But it might be the kind of thing that maybe at a library, again, you would be able to promote it through the municipal, library or something like that. So I think there are ways, but I think connecting it to other organizations would be helpful.
And I'll be honest, I could have done, I definitely could have done better. I was a little hesitant, but I made Main Street aware. But did I go and say, like, this is an event, I really want you to make sure you outreach to all of your people? You know what I mean? Like, no, I didn't. So I could have done a better job with that. Rotary, I did sort of make them aware, but I do have connections at Rotary. So if I were gonna do it again, maybe I would go to a Rotary meeting and say, like, hey, please come, next Wednesday night, we're gonna have appetizers down by the water, like, come down, and I think we would have gotten more. So it was our first run. I was disappointed that, because I also invited people that had been indicating that they wanted something like this, and so I was surprised that none of them came. But you do what you can. But we had a lot of people, and there were some good connections that were made. And I will tell you, the most valuable thing, and this is true of almost any time I talk to a group of residents, is that they, even Concom and stuff, they don't know how much we're doing. And I put together a slideshow, and it was, long, but not that long. And it talked about stuff we were doing, and really just touches the surface, but what resident sees the street sweeper go by and thinks of water quality,
Right.
or your catch basin cleaning and really thinks of water quality, or so many things that we're doing, salt, all of it, which isn't really Great Bay related. So the message is there, and it's always well received. So I have, like I said in the email, I have my PowerPoint deck that people can use to sort of supplement your own community's projects. So I don't think it's a huge lift. I mean, it's always work, but I don't think it's a huge lift. Melissa and Kala are just, obviously great resources. And then that's the other big piece that community or residents always react to, is the fact that we really are all working together, or at least trying to work together. And so, those, even though we had only a few people there, those were kind of their two feedbacks. And then the other, maybe we go to the schools, maybe we go to a Rotary meeting. And we will do that. I'd follow up and do it again, so.
Well, I appreciate that, and I know I'm interested, but I also know we're short-staffed right now, and people are really, and maybe this isn't the best time, we're in summer, people are off wanting to vacation and get away, and maybe in the fall, especially if we can build up a little more support. I think it's a great idea, but we are heading into budget cycle too, and I use that as a platform.
Totally.
To be honest with you, I do a lot, explaining to multiple levels if they're, but again, it's more the engaged citizenry, it's the people that volunteer on budget committee and other organizations. So it's trying to get the general public that's not necessarily plugged in to change. Thank you for those efforts.
Yeah, like I just made some notes of the small town of Newington, the Conservation Commission, the Selectmen, the Library Committee, the Rec Committee, because they utilize down along Fox Point. So in the schools, there's one little elementary school. It's good to get that point sorted out. But I just gotta figure it. I will say July and August are not good.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
So after school start would be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Almost city council, we only have one meeting in July.
Yeah. All right, great. Any comments from the remote folks?
Suzanne with the city of Portsmouth, I think maybe we could look at something perhaps in the fall, again, get past the summer season and we can touch base with Melissa and team. Also, we should just note for the minutes that I believe Chris Jacobs from Milton has joined us, so as a member, so that should be noted.
Chris Jacobs, and he is from Milton, and he is a member. All right,
Hey, Gretchen,
yes,
this is Jamie from UNH. I just wanted to throw out there that it seems like there's a pretty wonderful opportunity potentially to integrate some of these outreach and education efforts into the Great Bay 2030, which is, of course, just starting up. And there is an outreach and education focus group that's ramping up. I can't remember who exactly was on that, but I know that we did discuss with them on the water quality focus group too, uniting and kind of creating this more unified method about what everybody's doing to protect and improve the Great Bay.
yeah, that's a really good point. That's a really good point, Jamie. I'll make sure I think about that.
I could insert that I'm co-chairing.
Oh,
that group,
there you
so-
go.
So there's a good linkage
There.
there for sure, and if anyone wants to know more about.
The Great Bay 2030. Yes,
I just, as a brainstorming idea, just throw out there, there's another method could be to get a booth at events like Market Square Day,
Yeah,
Apple
Harvest
Harvest Day. I went to something at the Seacoast Science Center a few weeks ago where they had folks doing outreach like this, explaining things like this. Just an idea, if you're budgeting, there will be some costs associated. You need a volunteer or multiple to staff it.
well, Dover has done Apple Harvest Day every year, and we've raffled off, Steel DES is set up, and we've raffled off rain barrels as a ploy to get people to engage, and that has been successful. And building on that is a good idea, starting to get. In fact, I just sent out the email. I don't know if you guys go to Apple Harvest Day, we pass out little plastic helmets, so we're really trying to be less like environmentally devastating this year. But still have something that gets people to come in and talk to us. And I think actually, I don't know if anyone from Somersworth, but I know they had something similar in Somersworth.
I'm from the
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Okay, then I think that kind of leads into the next conversation about continuing to outreach to the other communities. Both in the, well, we'll talk about reaching out to the other regulated communities. But I think also the hope is that we'll be able to take these community conversations to communities even outside of the regulated communities so that it's really getting watershed wide. But now I wanted to move on to this item. Item number 4, this letter that we put together that would be outreach for other regulated communities. And it's building off on the 2 correspondence that went from CLF to EPA and then back from EPA to CLF. We actually have the authors of both of those here in the room today. So certainly, chime in if you agree with kind of what we were saying. But we wanted to take this opportunity to reach out to other communities and make sure people recognize that, I think maybe a year ago, there was a hesitance to get too involved because there wasn't sure if it was going to be this collective effort and working together. And even though we had talked about establishing a stakeholder committee, I think there were some concerns, and it's clear, I hope, the stakeholder committee and by having both EPA and stakeholder committee here at the table and part of all of these conversations, I hope it's evident that it is a collaborative effort. And then also, we do so much to make sure that all of the communities are keeping up and not getting left behind. We've got some outreach with Rollinsford. I know I've had a couple meetings with the Rollinsford folks. And I know Chris Jacobs, we're always there to help you if you guys need it. And so I think there's a lot to be said for the work that MAM's doing. And I think we're all of us that are on it are pretty proud of the work that we're doing. So I think it's a good opportunity to reach out to those other communities and try and keep the collaborative. Yeah.
The reach out, are you anticipating sending these letters, say to Kittery, Elliott, South Berwick? They are part of that estuary. Remember the big complaint was, why is it just us? There are other entities that dump into the bay.
Well, I have a feeling on that, but I know that it's not. So I think that's a good conversation. So I'll say,
Oh, okay.
I'll say my perspective is that I would encourage anyone to participate.
Yeah.
I think funding though, and making funding decisions makes most sense to stay to the regulated communities, because to me, I wasn't
talking about funding.
Okay.
I was figuring outreach, because the bigger connection is education. You gotta
Yes.
educate them about what's going on in the estuary by other communities. And maybe at some point in the future, they decide when and if they get a permit from EPA to jump in. That's what I thought the intent was. Because a lot of the complaints are, we need to do more.
So,
That's all.
yeah,
I'm not critical of what we're doing. We're gonna outreach.
so that makes good sense to me. So I think, Dennis, maybe we could have two messages, one sort of tailored to the please come join MAM, becoming a voting member, becoming a fiscal participant, and then have another one saying like, did you know we were doing this? Please come participate, listen, and stuff maybe. But that's just my thoughts. So I don't know if there are other folks. Yeah, hey, Suzanne.
Yeah, so I think it is two separate messages. There are those to the communities that are actually regulated by the permit. And I know you drafted a letter, Gretchen, that you circulated for us to look at. And yeah, then it's obviously the wider conversation and education, as Dennis mentioned, which is the more the merrier in terms of understanding how to improve water quality. So I think it is the two messages, but they are somewhat separate because of the nature of the regulated and the unregulated. So.
Any other comments or?
Make
No, I'm
sure
looking
we
at you,
send
but-
one to Summersworth,
Send one to Summersworth?
Well,
All right, I'll
they're
keep
in
that in
prep.
the minutes.
but they're,
Dennis Messier recommends sending it to Summersworth.
I'm on that committee,
Well,
so.
he's a city councilor, but they're not a participant. But yeah, we will certainly, anything folks think should be included in the letter. Or I'd love, Mel or Melissa, if you agree with the way that kind of the wording was being pulled out of the letters that you all both wrote.
Sure, I'll
Yeah,
comment. Well, first of all, thanks for sharing the letter. We
Yeah.
appreciate that. We agree with what it says. We support you all sending the letter. I amplify sort of what the message both CLF and we have sent already through our exchange of letters. I do want to be clear, when you talk about regulated communities, I mean, there's regulated under the total nitrogen general permit, then there's regulated under MS4, and we're specifically talking about under the TNGP here. So it's the 12 municipal permittees. And just to again, kind of remind folks that none of this is required by the permit, right? This is entirely voluntary. Our letter talks about, and it's fine, you do cite our letter and quote it in terms of encouraging, we can't require, we wouldn't require. But that's clear that it's encouraging. I understand there are dues associated with participating in MAM.
Mhm.
And that may be, a barrier for some of the smaller communities who recognize that. And I think, obviously with force requiring we do that in part because of that. We would view, of course, that kind of commitment is a good indication of commitment to the mission of command and overall attaining of the adaptive management goals of the permit. So I'll stop with that and just say that, we support it, we like the letter, and I think, our letter, our single letters at least I always had to elicit Bill's participation here today.
Yeah.
In part, I think, that was our intent, was to kind of get the attention of some of the municipalities that were not yet participating in this forum. So I'm really happy to see Bill here today and they're interested in potentially participating.
So I do want to say one thing to something that you brought up was the cost. And I want to make sure that everyone hears the costs are prorated based on your regulated flow. So Portsmouth carries the largest fiscal contribution. And then it gets much, much lower for the smaller communities that have the lower flow. I don't have the cost breakdown in front of me, but I can't remember, Milton was maybe a couple $1,000s. It was not a huge lift. So maybe that's something to remind folks of as in this letter, is that the funding is prorated. Yeah.
Could you let me know what would be the new bids? Is that every year?
Yeah, it's an estimate, but we said, okay, let's say our total is $300,000. You break that down. And so I can send that, I'll resend that to everyone after this meeting of what those breakdowns are. Obviously it changes depending on the number of participants, but for new fields, it's relatively low. So yes, I can do that.
And Gretchen, to that point,
Yeah.
in the letter, it says we're committed to providing funding, training, public outreach opportunities. Do those funds support those types of activities essentially?
Do those funds support which type?
The dues, the base.
Oh, yes, yeah. So, yeah, worth saying that right now, we funded PTAP to go do technical assistance for every community, including Newfields. You do not need to be paying at this point. This is really valuable. So, we're funding technical assistance for that. Obviously, a large portion of the funding goes towards the monitoring and continued scientific research, but then we also do projects, all sorts of different things. So that's kind of what the funding goes for. Yes, Melissa.
I maybe two comments I would make on the letter.
Yep.
Not to wordsmith, but just technically speaking, it says that CLF expressed concern with some of the Great Bay community's minimal work toward compliance with the general permit.
Mhm.
And technically, I guess that really would be incorrect, because as long as they're complying with their point source, hold the load or 8 milligrams, they're in compliance technically with the permit.
Mhm.
And so our concern is that some communities may not be progressing with the intent of the permit to advance non-point source and stormwater management activities enabled by this flexible permit. So I can get you some
Yep.
language, but I think that would be more correct.
Yeah.
And then, our larger point, as we I've discussed in the past here, was to make sure that all municipalities understand this provision, in the settlement agreement that enables us to petition EPA to revoke general permit status for communities that are not, complying with the intent of the permit. And I think the letter does that very well. So I really appreciate the way that you captured that. My second point would simply be that maybe as a way of enticing communities that are not yet participating in that, is to kind of go through some of the perks of being part of this, this, collaborative, like, shared all of the things that you've listed, that
Yeah.
there's a lot of reasons why this is a great benefit to communities, and maybe do a better selling job.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah.
I completely agree, Melissa. That was the one thing I flagged, was just making sure that we can identify those collaborative opportunities and kind of the, I don't want to say pitch, but, you know, making sure these other communities are specifically aware of what it is that we've been accomplishing and are looking towards accomplishing, and just that, you know, the power of the numbers, right? You know, it's great for a smaller community to be able to align with the larger communities and learn from that and decide what is best for their community, but the opportunity to just learn
Mhm.
sitting in here is great.
Yes. Any discussion? Remote folks?
Suzanne with the city of Portsmouth, I would entertain, I would motion to authorize Gretchen Young to take the comments that she's heard today and finalize a letter to the other communities who are not yet members of MAM.
Have a second?
Second.
All right, Dennis. Any more discussion? Okay, then I'm gonna do a roll call vote. Suzanne Woodland,
Yes,
Paul Toussaint, I'm so sorry.
It's Tuesday, and yes.
Yes, and I've got, where are you? Chris Jacobs
Yes.
and Dennis Messier,
Yes.
Mike Bezanson.
Yes.
And Jennifer Perry.
Yes.
And Gretchen Young, yes. Excellent. Could I entertain a motion to move item number 6 up to above item number 5, because we do have somebody here that from
So
USDA. All right, Dennis move,
Second.
Jennifer second. All right, quick roll call vote. So Suzanne Woodland,
yes,
Paul Toussaint,
Yes.
Chris Jacobs,
Yes.
Gretchen Young, yes. Dennis Messier.
Yes.
Yes, Mike Bezanson.
Yes.
Yes, and Jennifer Perry.
Jen, yes.
All right, great. Then I'm gonna move to item number 6. This is some opportunities for funding and collaborators. This isn't gonna be super long, but we do have Matt Brown from the USDA. And I had the opportunity to meet with him last week, and I thought it was really interesting, some of the work that they're doing. So I invited him here to come talk to the larger group. So Matt, unless you've got more intro, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Gretchen. Hi, everybody. My name is Matt Brown, and I am the State Conservation Engineer with NRCS, which is the old Soil Conservation Service, part of USDA. And I just wanted to mention to the group that we do have watershed planning funds that are available. Over 500 million was allocated in the bipartisan infrastructure legislation that went through Congress last year, early parts of this year. And so what we're offering and reaching out to communities for is we're looking for potential partnerships to implement our watershed plan where it would coincide with your needs in nutrient reduction, flood damage reduction. We have several purposes along those lines, but what I spoke with Dover about last week is, nutrient management, of course, is a big concern amongst this group. Habitat restoration and ecosystem restoration, such as like shellfish, oysters, could be salt marsh, could be eelgrass, as well as things up more in the watershed, like culvert replacement, fish passage, dam removal. A lot of those things seem to be important to, I think, some of the people in this group. Many of us in the Great Bay watershed. So I just wanted to mention that we do have a program. I'm the local contact in New Hampshire. The way this program rolls out is that a town or a municipality has got to be a sponsor. It's got to be a unit of government with taxation ability, with eminent domain ability, and operation and maintenance responsibilities and abilities to maintain structures, to clean them out. our watershed plans are typically long-term plans, 50 to 100 years, is what the service life of a lot of the practices are that we put in the plans. Some may be shorter, but historically, these were flood control systems. They were flood conveyance systems, channels, dams, things of that nature. The program has morphed to where now we're looking at other purposes, and we're obviously focusing less on building dams and controlling floodwaters and more on flood resiliency and ecosystem restoration. So we're seeing a lot more applications along those lines to address fish and wildlife habitat, watershed protection. We are a Department of Agriculture, so the bias is rural and it's farm related. So in some cases, the programs reach out into land treatment, buffering and on-site disposal, things like that, that we haven't typically partnered with communities on, but that's something that this new funding and this new effort is, I think, targeting with towns to form partnerships, identify a watershed, and then identify those things in your town or in your watershed that could be addressed to improve ecosystem health, water quality, things like that. So I talked with Dover last week. We may have something there. We've reached out to several towns that have expressed some interest. The first step in the process is to send some kind of a letter of request to us, and I sent a template of that to Gretchen last week. You'd send that back saying, hey, here are the items we've identified in this watershed, call it the Bellamy River or the Oyster River, or whatever the river might be, this watershed, and here are some of the main objectives that we'd like to put this funding toward and do the analysis of. You'd send in a letter like that. We'd do a feasibility, no cost to the town. We have a consultant that's kind of collecting data, and then we kind of sift it and find out which projects meet our program objectives. They still meet the agricultural requirement of 20% of the benefits have to be rural or agricultural. So that's one of the requirements. It can't be strictly an urban benefit. It's got to be attributed to other parts of the watershed. Let's just call it that. And that consultant does that work, typically takes a year, and then we roll into if you qualify into a watershed plan that has an environmental document with it. Kind of think of an environmental impact statement, but of a smaller nature. So we try to follow all federal rules around water resource allocations. So anyway, that's kind of I don't know if there's any questions. Gretchen, I don't know if you want to kind of help me translate this to the group, what you might feel is most pertinent, but that's kind of what we talked about last week. Getting a letter of request from a sponsor that may have identified a watershed need, and then we'll do a feasibility study and collect the studies and the reports you already have on the shelf into a kind of a comprehensive checklist package where we go through and identify primary purposes, maybe some of the obstacles. One of the things that we talked about in Dover last week as an obstacle is sometimes Superfund sites or brownfield sites can be a real obstacle and wouldn't probably score high in our ranking of projects to fund. And I know that might not be great news because those are some of the sites you really want to treat and some of the bigger sources of pollution. But again, that's not really been the focus of this program. So I'm happy to take any questions. I don't want to bore anybody with any more details around this watershed program, and I can't speak to exactly how much funding remains. There's been a lot of interest nationwide. We are New Hampshire is one of only, I think, 12 or 13 states that haven't submitted any kind of application from any town. So we're still reaching out to towns, trying to get some interest. Most other New England states even have some level of interest from towns. So we're still kind of, we're reaching out to folks up in the Saco watershed, different watersheds all over the state, trying to get some traction. A question from Jamie, would the NRCS plans intersect or integrate with existing watershed management plans? Yeah, that's a great question. My feeling is that it would address a lot of the same issues. We would look at taking those plans and picking out pieces of it that would fit under our practice standards. But we probably couldn't do things like wastewater treatment upgrades, things like that. There's a couple of caveats in the program where sanitary sewers and stormwater sewers are the responsibility of the sponsor 100%. So if some of those are included in watershed plans that you already have, you'd get to keep those, and we would try to fund those other pieces that fit under our programs. I don't know if that answers your question at all.
Well, I think it's worth like building on that, because I think what we talked about in Dover is maybe doing something just for the Bellamy River. And when we talk about the watershed for the Bellamy River, it's sort of smaller, you can think about it. And we could, have somebody take a year to look at and develop a watershed plan for that. But if we're talking about the Great Bay watershed, I mean, the idea of hiring someone for a year to, make a plan. I mean, we've been doing this, a million.
Forever.
So I think I would hope, or I guess I was hoping out of this conversation, we could collaboratively work together and really build on some of the watershed plans that have been put together, and then start tackling some of those projects areas. I mean, you had talked about aquaculture as being potentially something you all would be interested in, certainly something that we're interested in. So I think there's some good potential there. I was hoping that there would be.
Yeah, right. I'm not really sure about how we would all coordinate that under one plan. It may be some separate plans at this point. I know Connecticut's done 4 or 5 different submittals for different watersheds. It's a good question is how I know we can have multiple towns sign on to the same plan. The Cape Cod example that I shared had, all 17 towns sign on to that plan. And they recently funded, I think, a $30 million bridge replacement to help with salt marsh restoration down there. But it's been a long process. This thing started in 2004, I believe, was when their plan was kind of put together. Where they identified close to 200 sites where there was pollution occurring or salt marsh degradation occurring. Over 200, they prioritized those to like the top 96 sites. And now they've got that on the shelf. They're trying to put funding on those top 96. So that's kind of where, that's the only precedent I've got in New England for one that's kind of been like this, where they've funded ecosystem restoration, and they funded, aquatic organism passage, fish passage, culvert enhancement, a bridge to replace a few culverts, that sort of thing. But it hasn't been a quick process, but there's a lot of flexibility in the program. In that case, they had a few, they had a conservation district and a state agency that kind of brought the group together and was also a sponsor. So think of like, I don't know, well, you guys can think of the different agencies that may be able to help coordinate, but there's some potential there for looking at a larger watershed.
And I see Suzanne, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if maybe either Gretchen or Matthew could post a link to maybe where this program, we could easily read up and share with other staff, and maybe have some side conversations with some of our more rural members. There might be, a watershed that covers, part of Dover and Rollinsford, so there might be a nice synergy somewhere that we could take a offline kind of conversation. So I just wondered if there was an easy way to, if there's a link somewhere, so we could just follow up easily to get background on this.
Yeah, definitely. Go ahead.
Sorry, Matt. No, go ahead.
Oh, certainly after I talk here, I'll post in the chat the link to the watershed operations. And there's also the National Watershed Coalition is a group that has been very active, and they've got a nice page on what's happening in different watersheds throughout the country. And they highlight the Cape Cod project as an example. It may not be, exactly comparable to what we're talking about, but at least it's New England based and has a lot of these practices that are different than irrigation and flood control, which has been the history of the vast majority of our funding has gone toward those two things, irrigation out west and flood control kind of in the Midwest and West, dams and flood control structures. So I'll definitely post something in the chat here in just a moment.
Great. Thank you so much for coming and talking to us. Any
Yeah,
other?
thanks for having me. And I'll also post my contact information if anyone wants to follow up. My email phone number. I'm here in Dover, on Locust Street, not too far from where the Dover Public Works office is there. But anyway, I'm happy to talk with any of you at any time, and I'll put that information in the chat.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Now, the other one, I was hoping somebody, and I don't know who I'm gonna put on the spot here, but if anyone wants to spend like 2 minutes just talking about the Great Bay 2030 initiative, and some of the funding. Anyone?
I'm happy to do so.
We can let, yeah, okay, Melissa's,
Ella wants to.
oh, you want to? Nope, Melissa's gonna do it, just 2 minutes.
There's been for about 8 or 9 years, there's been a group of organizations and agencies working together to formulate a shared vision for Great Bay investment. This was a request of the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation back around 2015. The groups that have been part of this initiative are Conservation Law Foundation, the Piscataqua Region Estuaries Partnership, New Hampshire DES, the Nature Conservancy, and the Great Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve down in Greenland, which is run by New Hampshire Fish and Game. And these organizations have been working together for, as I say, for about 8 years. Initially came up with a vision called Great Bay 2020, and hope that that vision would lead to more investment from New Hampshire Charitable in efforts to restore and protect the health of the estuary. The groups revisited that vision and reformulated the Great Bay 2030 vision to stay current. And New Hampshire Charitable was very successful in finding a donor who has committed $12 million over a 5-year period to bring that vision to reality. And so it's a very massive and exciting opportunity to gather again all the stakeholders and organizations that are working around the estuary in different ways, and to have a very bottom-up process for identifying priorities for funding across 5 different focus areas. And those focus areas are habitat restoration, a lot of the work that's already underway with organizations that have been focused on a shared conservation plan. Around coastal resilience, and the work group called the CAW, the Coastal Adaptations Work Group, has a sort of process for sharing projects and work around that space. The new areas that will be focused on are water quality and quantity issues, and I believe Jamie Poole is going to take a leadership role in that working group. Another working group is on habitat restoration. So our work around eelgrass and oysters and salt marsh and other kinds of restoration work will be chaired by Brianna Group at the Nature Conservancy and Trevor Matera from PrEP. And then the last is around building a culture of stewardship and community engagement. And that's this, kind of general idea of how do we increase awareness, appreciation, and engagement in these issues. And I will be chairing that working group with Lynn Vaccaro from the Great Bay National Estuary Research Reserve. So the process is just getting underway. A coordinator of Great Bay 2030 will be hired to kind of coordinate all this work, these different organizations, all these work groups and priorities and so on. And we're interviewing candidates for that position now. That position will be housed at Conservation Law Foundation, but that will not be an advocacy position. It will be really to serve Great Bay 2030 and all of these the stakeholders and priorities. But it's an amazing opportunity, and we welcome anyone to be involved in any of the working groups if those topics are of interest. And we'll just keep you posted.
Great, thank you. All right, any questions on that?
I have a question, because I think I might have missed one.
Yeah.
I heard habitat restoration, coastal resilience, water quality and quantity, and stewardship. Building the culture of stewardship.
Habitat restoration, did you get that?
Habitat, coastal resilience, water quality and climate.
Oh, land conservation. Yes.
Jim, did you have something?
Not on this, no.
Okay, sorry.
Oh.
All right, thank you, Melissa. Any other funding or collaborators? Anyone else?
Yeah, I had just wanted to give a quick update on the NOAA application for eelgrass and oyster restoration. So, last year we had applied for a congressionally directed spending allocation of $2 million. In March, we were awarded $1 million towards eelgrass and oyster restoration. NOAA had reached out to us to submit a updated funding grant application, which we did, working with Katie, Dr. Burdick, Dr. Grizzle, Brianna Group, Kristen Ward, Trevor Materas, and others to put together the grant application, which was submitted initially on June 10th. And then we submitted updated information after feedback from NOAA on June 17th. So the deadline for the submissions was July 1st. So hopefully we got all the information they need. Just a big thank you to all the project partners for getting that together on short notice. So we'll definitely keep you posted with any updates, but just want to give you a quick update on that.
Great, thank you. And a huge thanks. I said it last time too, but huge thanks, Jim and Rochester, for taking such a big lead on that. Yeah, 2 thumbs up. Kala? All right. Then I think, unless anyone else has anything, I think it's time to head into item number 5, which is the discussion of the adaptive management plan after year 1. So we're about 1 year into this, and you, as outlined in our adaptive management plan, we have agreed to update and resubmit 1 year or within 1 year of our last submission, which Josh informed me was July 30th. So we don't even have to the end of the month. We have to the 30th to submit. So we're going to take some time to go through and update anything that needs to be updated. We'll make revisions. If there's major revisions, then we'll have to have another meeting for a vote. If it's editorial and relatively minor, I'm hoping that we'll be able to just approve with those, and we'll take care of doing the submission. And as I noted in the email, the Appendix D, right? Appendix D is the source reduction plans. And those we are, per our CLF settlement agreement, the 3 largest communities are reviewing those plans annually in September. So that's not the focus of what we're doing here. That said, if some of the smaller communities, or really any community, wants to update theirs as part of this resubmission, feel free to pass that along. But if it's not done, that is okay. But make sure that we're on track to do a full update in September. And that we decided that because it aligned with the MS4 updates or annual reports. So maybe in future years, we'll get all of this lined up to be at the same time. But for right now, those are kind of the commitments that we've established. So with that, any questions before we dive in? All right. So then let's head to the first pieces. I think the background and all of that's going to stay the same. So the first piece is going to be your commitment number A, or letter A, excuse me, the monitor ambient water quality in the Great Bay. And Kala, this was largely you all working on this. And so I'm hoping you could speak to if you've reviewed it, if we have any updates, any pieces that we aren't on target with that we need to correct, etc.
Yeah, I'm just looking over my notes from this morning. So no, there are no, this is the top row of the Excel sheet that you sent out. Is that correct, Gretchen?
Yes, yep, it's gonna be the top row. It's the writing that is in section A of the adaptive management plan. Right here, section 8, and then yes, it is the top row as well. So stakeholder engagement, PRMC participation, recommendations from prep, tech, and committee convened by CLF. So it's a continually.
Yeah, I would say overall, I think you get some of the subsequent rows get into some specifics, which I can address, but overall, we are on track and there are no significant problems to report, and everything is progressing on track.
I guess it's worth, okay, so then we'll start. We can update this. So the Piscataqua Regional Estuaries Partnership, part of the School of Marine Science and Ocean Engineering at the University of New Hampshire, is expected to be the organization relied upon by MAM and presumably other agencies for ambient water quality monitoring. So I would say that statement is still correct. Through the MAM, the members intend to address Part 3-1A of the general permit by funding an equitable and proportional amount of the PREP ambient monitoring in the estuary. That is still correct, yep. To date, MAM has funded 175,000, and so we can update that number. I don't have that with me, but we can update that to reflect the additional funds that were funded through this year towards the funding towards the work, and committed to continuing funding monitoring efforts through the 5-year permit term. So other than the cost update, that's correct. MAM is also funding the work of its consultants, Brown and Caldwell, that's true, who have been working with PREP team on continued development of the monitoring program. See Appendix E and F of this AMP for MAM agreement and authorization to fund work. So all of that is still correct with the exception of the update. So then moving on into the summary of plan. So this plan covers ambient water quality monitoring, including potential physical and biological stressors that may be affecting eelgrass health in the estuary, including but not limited to nitrogen. All monitoring data described in this section, including the underlying information used to calculate nutrient loads, will be made publicly available. So all of that still holds true, correct?
Correct.
Publicly available. So data collection, nutrient load estimating, calculated for point and non-point sources on an annual basis. So is that still true?
Yes, that is true. And in fact, part of the state of our estuaries report, which, you know, the next report is 2023. We calculate annual load through 2020. The last one went through 2015, I believe. So we have a 5-year update on that. And the preliminary numbers are actually have just been reviewed through the technical advisory committee as of yesterday. So those numbers are now available, both in terms of point source and non-point source. So that's exciting, and that's progressing very much on track.
So Kala, would you ever be able to just put that, give me a blurb, you know, progressing on track, et cetera, and then I'll add that to this AMP?
Sure, I can do that. Just, in fact, why don't I just take some notes and then I'll send all of this to you through an email later.
That would be perfect.
Yep.
Perfect. All right, water quality monitoring, dissolved oxygen, nutrient concentrations, total suspended solids, chromorphic, dissolved oxygen, carbon, etc. in 8 tributaries to the Great Bay estuary. So are we still doing water monitoring for all of those?
Absolutely. Everything's on track.
Samples are taken between March and December of each year of the permit period. Results are generally available by the summer. Yep.
That's right. Exactly. It's the following summer. That's correct.
I don't think they're all gonna take this long, but I appreciate us going through this because we gotta make sure we're doing the right thing. So water quality monitoring on approximately 12 stations in the Great Bay Estuary, including same parameters monitored in the rivers, as well as light penetration, plankton, and I don't know, CHL-A.
Chlorophyll A, which is a proxy for phytoplankton.
Yep. So you're still on track with samples being taken April and December, between April and December?
Absolutely.
In addition, okay, cool. The eelgrass distribution, okay, here we go. So tier one aerial monitoring is currently assessed every 2 years. Next assessment is 2021. So what is the update on that?
Yeah, so with your funding, we're actually not doing every 2 years, we're doing every year.
Yeah.
And so last year we did it, 2021, and we're going to be doing it again in 2022, and that work has already begun.
Cool.
I can tell you that 2021, it was about the same amount of total acreage, but there were some really big gains in the Portsmouth Harbor and Rye area, like pretty significant gains in the Portsmouth Harbor and Rye area, but then that was sort of negatively compensated for by some losses in other areas, Little Bay, Upper Piscataqua, and Great Bay. So in the end, it didn't really change from the previous measurement, but there are some changes within that. And our evidence is that the health, so the acreage just tells you where the grass is. It doesn't tell you anything about the health of the grass. Our evidence is that the health is improving in those specific places where we monitor. So we're getting, the density seems to be going up, as does biomass over the last 2 or 3 years. So that's good news.
Great. Okay, so any of the okay, measures of the eelgrass abundance and health. So we just talked about that. Starting in 2021, a new program, Tier 2, will assess the parameters at 50 sites throughout the estuary.
That was last year, and we've already started this year. If people, you're probably tight on time, but if you want to see some quick video, I have that ready for you. But just so you know that work is progressing as we speak. I think we have divers out currently in the water right now. And we've had a number of sampling days already, maybe as many as 7 or 8, and that work is going well.
Great. So Carla, I'll ask you to show the video maybe at the end of the meeting, because I would love to see it, but I'm going to keep people moving.
Sure.
All right, water quality and sediment monitoring associated with Tier 2.
Yep.
Is as described in Appendix C, which was resilience and positive feedbacks, water quality management, and eelgrass health in the Great Bay Estuary. That was that whole long report.
I think you may be referring to the Eelgrass Resilience Project, which was funded by NOAA. And the field work for that started last week. So we have 2 field seasons, one this year and one next year. The field work started last week, and it's going well, although there are the usual lessons learned the first time you get into the field and try to do a new experiment. You know, gosh, this water is really wet. Gosh, this water is really cold, you know, really surprising things like that, and some other stuff, but overall it's going very well.
Great. Okay, and then the green crabs.
The green crab data is continuing to be collected. We are going to be able to provide people with an assessment of that in the online version of the State of Our Estuaries report coming out in 2023.
And then anything you want to add to data collection?
Just that we're having really great meetings, continue to have great meetings with Brown and Caldwell. We had one a couple of weeks ago. We'll probably talk more about that at the PRMC, Piscataqua Region Monitoring Collaborative. Acronym for that is PRMC. Our next meeting is July 14th at 10:30 a.m. And that's primarily really a budgetary conversation. It ends up being about our plans for science and monitoring and how that affects budgets. And in preparation for that, we've had some good meetings. We have some interesting changes in the works, such as you mentioned before, Gretchen, we monitor from April through December, but folks are realizing that we really need to have some data in those winter months. So that's going to be a thing. We're probably going to put we had taken some stations offline because we had no money for them, like Lower Piscataqua River, Salmon Falls. Those are going to be put back online, hopefully in 2023, because we have more money than we did a couple of years ago. So all that work is going really well, and really continuing to really appreciate working with Brown and Caldwell.
Great, thank you. All right, then next, we're going to move on to the river discharge measurements. There are no river discharge measurements for 3 of 8 of the rivers that are used to estimate the contaminant loads entering the Great Bay Estuary. Consider coordinating with the USGS or exploring other options for estimating or measuring river flow near existing water quality sampling locations to improve contaminant load estimates and provide input data for the hydrodynamic model. Any update on that?
Actually, that is something that hasn't been on my radar, that what you just said about a gap in the discharge information. If you could give me that page number, I'm going to get together with Michelle Shattuck and discuss that specifically.
Okay, that's page number 10 out of our adaptive management plan. And it, yep.
Okay, I will discuss with her and be able to report back to you on that.
Great. Okay, seaweed measure of abundance incorporated into the tier 2 as mentioned, and you just said that is correct.
Yep, that is happening.
And sediment.
And that is also happening as part of tier 2. I will just give people a little bit of, so far what we're finding in the tier 2 work is that most of the seaweed seems to be in the Great Bay, Little Bay area. That while there is some seaweed in the Piscataqua River and in Portsmouth Harbor, it doesn't seem to be as abundant and sort of interfering with eelgrass as it is in Great Bay and Little Bay. So just giving you that little anecdotal tidbit there, but yeah, the seaweed work is progressing exactly as it should with tier 2.
And I just want to make sure you've got a couple of places where we're talking about at, for example, the seaweed at all 50 sites, the sediment at 25 sites. I just want to make sure those numbers, because they're so specific, are correct when we resubmit.
Yeah, they're actually, we'll have to correct those because right now it's 25 sites. Initially we were going to do 50. And then as often happens, you get out in the field and you realize stuff takes a lot longer than you thought. So we were going to have this sort of tiered system where some stations were going to get more treatments than others. But now what's happened is we're doing 25 sites throughout the estuary and every station gets the same treatment.
Okay, I think all of that makes good sense. I just want to make sure, if you don't mind reading through this section of the adaptive management plan so that what we submit reflects what is happening.
You got it. I will do that.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, data, any other questions for Carla on data collection? Got him in the hot seat here, guys. All right, data analysis and accessibility. Data analysis.
Yep, so data analysis is progressing. We're working with statisticians at UNH to do more and more sophisticated analyses, and some of those will be in the state of our estuaries. And that's going to continue for the next few years. And in terms of data accessibility, I've talked about this before, but we have a new publicly accessible database that some stakeholders have already started to play with and found very interesting. And that's another thing that whenever you want, Gretchen, I can give you a quick demo. It's The user interface is still being improved, but it's pretty great considering we had nothing like this a couple of years ago. And now anybody can just access this data and download it to work on. Whereas before you would have to go to DES and it was a little bit more arduous to get this data.
So where we say, it says PREP intends that all data will be accessible. And it says this system is currently in the beta phase. Is it time to update that it is accessible and it's past beta phase? Or are we still?
Yeah, I mean, I want to make it clear that this has actually been shared. The website has been shared with, and it is as part of the beta phase. We're basically asking everybody to try it out and give us feedback. So that's another thing that I can update if you'd like as I go through.
Thank you. Okay, and then on to stakeholder engagement.
Christian, before we
yeah.
go there, I guess I did have a question for Kala. Hi, Kala.
I'm a-
And has to do with macroalgae, recognizing that it, I believe, is one of the lines of evidence that DES uses for its impaired water lists through a 3D assessments, water quality assessments. Is there any thought or discussion about, and also recognizing that I don't think there are any real proven methods, right? Whether there's any thought given to exploring whether doing some sort of macroalgae assessment of abundance in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Mel. So as part of tier 2, 25 sites throughout the estuary, macroalgae abundance is assessed. So whenever we go down, we look at percent cover. And then we also do, we remove the material from some of the quadrats and we bring it back and we measure biomass. And we also identify the species. So we can track how the actual species are changing. And it's important to note that probably the most problematic seaweeds are invasive. And so they are doing really well in high temperatures. And as long as there's enough nutrients, which there have been, although nutrient load is going down. So abundance is being assessed. And that's something that we feel is super important because phytoplankton gets washed out pretty, after a few days, but the seaweed oftentimes doesn't. So in some respects, it's a really important variable in our system, more so than in other systems that don't have as much flushing. The other thing is that phytoplankton gets captured a little bit in your light measurements, along with total suspended solids and colored dissolved organic matter. But seaweed doesn't, right? You could have really a terrible seaweed problem and you would never know it by just measuring light, because you're never going to put a light meter underneath a bunch of seaweed. So it's a really tricky thing. And so we're very happy that with funding from the MAM and other communities, we've been able to start this new tier 2 monitoring program. And we've added this seaweed component that a lot of people don't do because it's a really important variable in our system. And Mel, I will also add that this eelgrass resilience project is taking it a step further and not just looking at seaweed abundance, but it's looking at seaweed growth rates. So we're going to get some good information there as well.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, then moving on into stakeholder engagement. I don't think we have to go through all of this, but there haven't been any changes. We can still say that Jennifer Perry is the co-chair. Ted Deers, are you still the co-chair of the PRMC?
I was hoping it wasn't a life sentence, but I don't know if we have selected another co-chair yet or not. Kala, we have not yet really had that discussion.
Right. So there are a couple announcements, if not official, sort of preliminary. I think we were talking about Steve Kuchar taking over that role for you, Ted, although I don't know if that's
We
been
were, yep.
finalized.
We had
And
had that
then,
thought, yeah.
Yeah, and then I don't know if Jennifer Perry had an update as well.
Yeah, I've been meaning, if the greater group doesn't know, most of you do, that I have announced that I will be retiring by the end of this year.
Oh,
Yes, it's true. So we will be needing to find a municipal representative to co-chair the PRMC, as long as you want to continue with that kind of structure.
I feel like it's worked really well, so I would like to continue that.
Okay, well, we won't dive into that today, but we'll make note that we'll continue that structure of a DES rep and a municipal rep as co-chair.
I would just note that it's a fairly light lift for a municipal co-chair.
Okay.
Prep does most of the work, and we're there really as a sounding board to help to formulate that from our various perspectives.
Jennifer, just for the record, I did know that. I did have a more reaction when I first heard it, but you know, now I'm just kind of ignoring it. We get you to the end of the year. Okay, great. And then MAM has hired Brian Caldwell, so that is all staying on track. A stakeholder committee has been convened with CLF to provide insight, so that stays on track. MAM and the respective municipalities invite and encourage broad participation, so all of that is the same. So Kala, just going through, it looked like there were some modifications, but no major changes to the adaptive management plan, to that section of the adaptive management plan.
Yeah, I agree with that characterization, and I will go through and get you all this. Can you give me a sense of when you would need that by in terms of these sort of minor corrections?
If you can get it to me in the next few weeks, it is due, fully packaged, due back to EPA by July 30. And we'll have a discussion by the voting members as to whether we want to have a review and approval ahead of that submission, or if the modifications are minor enough that folks feel comfortable approving today.
Okay.
So that'll be at the end of the conversation, but
Yeah, I'll get you something in the next 2 weeks then.
awesome, thank you. Okay, moving on to our PTAP portion. We're gonna come back to you, Paula, although I think that was your big piece, but we'll come back to you towards the end. But B is the pollutant tracking and accounting. And I know that you all did read through, Jamie and Sally, you read through, so if you want to summarize kind of any changes you wanted to make to those sections.
Sure. Yep.
I don't know if you can see Sally's here too. Hi, Jamie. She showed up. She didn't say, she said she wasn't going to, but she came. Oh, I still can't see her. Where is she? Oh, way over there.
Yeah, I can start off if you guys can hear me all right.
Yep.
So nothing too huge to change from the actual document, just some, positive advancements, I think, and we can work with you to just kind of sprinkle that in. Most of it is just tense. So as you know, the part B, the plan includes tracking land use conversions, new or modified structural stormwater controls, new or modified non-structural controls, and the septic systems. As far as I'll tackle the structural and non-structural systems first, which is couched under what we call accounting. So we've worked with our database designers to actually link the PTAP tracking tool to the EPA's BMP accounting and tracking tool. And this was sort of, we did have, I guess, what I call some interim accountability within the tool itself. But linking it to the BAT allows us to use the actual approved performance curves in Appendix F of the MS4 permit and the EPA approved performance characterization based on the physical storage capacity of the system. So we have linked these already. And so for the accounting side, I would say we would just change the tense of that language to from will to have or something like that. So that's been very successful. As far as the long-term tracking of nitrogen loads, we were always, because the long-term land use changes are very cumbersome in a site-specific tracking database like PTAP, we were always envisioning working at a more regional scale to be doing this through GIS. And I'm happy to see that Mel's there. We wouldn't change any of the language or the approach. This is still our intent. And we have new opportunities now to continue doing this. So as far as the long-term land use change tracking, we would like to do that through some of the regional GIS analyses. So we have a 2010 data set, we have a 2015 data set, which is really what a lot of the existing hotspot maps are accessing. And then I'll ask Mel to maybe update us, but we've been in discussion with EPA to possibly pilot since we have 2020 data available, pilot the kind of processing of, we call them hydrologic response units. It's really the building blocks of the pollutant load mapping that's being done, again, with EPA land use export rates. And so we potentially have the ability to update those with the 2020 data set in collaboration with EPA. So it wouldn't look entirely different than the hotspot maps from 2015. We all follow the same general process. The updates would be a slight shifting. Instead of using a parcel layer, we would likely use a meter by meter geographic pixel to do the analysis, but that could be overlaid with the parcel layer as well, so that there'll be congruency and consistency across the data sets. With that in place, we would then have these 5-year increments, and it'd be our intention to continue that over time. So we'd be able to track long-term land use changes between 2010, 2015, and 2020. And this again would be your overall report card. We kind of know what's going to be in the data. We generally don't see increases in forest. The tendency is to see decreases in open space and increases in residential and commercial properties, and therefore impervious cover. But just having that tracked over time with these regional efforts would be what we'd be shooting for in the next year. And so no real changes necessary in the language, but then I'll just toss it over to Mel, and maybe, I don't know if this is public yet. It's just been stuff that we've been speaking about with EPA.
Jamie, are you referring to our strong potential to be working with our Office of Research and Development on this project that you learned about from Mark Voorhees recently?
Yes.
Yeah, well, I tell you, you just described it better than I could.
I was hoping I could say, Mel, could you please update this and then get it back to me? So that I can-
No, and there's really no update necessary. Again, this is something, even though the permit's been relatively new, we've been thinking about this for a long time. And we already made our original estimates on the hotspot maps that we'll likely utilize for the nitrogen source identification reports, consistent with these methods. This is just a great opportunity to work with the EPA team to really consolidate our efforts and make sure we're all on the same page. But we know generally we are. There might be a few land use classifications that are different. And all that is taking the 155 or so land use classifications that we can develop in GIS and distilling it down to the 7 land use types that we have pollutant load export rates for. So it's really a great opportunity that I'm looking forward to. And I guess what I'll do, Mel, is publicly thank you for coming to the table and offering this as a resource to us.
Yeah, I mean, it's just something that's come about in the past couple of months. We're going to be meeting with DES in a few weeks and talk more about that. And I think maybe we could, by the September meeting, possibly have it'll be certainly more well, it'll be firmer, and we'll have a better idea about the specifics, I think, by then. And maybe we could do a short presentation on the work and what the desired outcomes of that work would be and how it's applicable to your work on the ground here. Does that make sense?
Great. That's awesome. Yep. Yeah, and I just think the opportunity really is to track the long-term land use changes on a regional level, as opposed to trying to piece it together from site-specific development programs, or applications. So then the last component is really the municipal participation. And so this is the technical assistance, and we have been working hard. I want to thank Jamie McCarty, who's really helped along our integration of PTAP into municipal code. And so Fort Smith and Dover and Exeter, for that matter, have been really leaders in realizing the potential. So what we've done is incorporated this into, and maybe Jamie, you can explain this better than I can, but trying to incorporate the use of PTAP into the planning process and the site plan review process, so that the developers are entering in their individual properties. And then what that does is it, puts the onus on developers to input private lands into PTAP. And so the responsibility that municipalities have are really relegated only to your own municipal operations. So that would be non-structural controls like catch basin cleaning and street sweeping, and things, structural BMPs that you're implementing as part of, again, your plans. And so we've been working with also Rollinsford, and or through the SRPC, we've been working with Rollinsford, and also, I'm just drawing a blank, sorry.
Milton.
Milton, thank you. Sorry, Chris, I don't know how I forgot Milton. But we've been working as they're updating their site plan to get the same language in there, so that through the development and the planning process, those engineers that are doing the site plan designs are also entering this information into PTAP. We've had some trainings with individual consultant engineers to just, it is a little bit different of a process, although if you've been doing any type of tracking and accounting, it's really just a few minor calculation changes, which I won't go into, but it's very easy once we can sit down and explain to them how PTAP works to translate that. And we're recording these sessions and also posting them on the web for future access. We also work with, so the next year, what we'll be trying to do is doing some reporting. So we will download anybody's inputs into the database and run them through the BAT and do annual accounting reporting, not as a condition of your permit, obviously, but just as a sort of a large scale assessment of where you are and who needs additional assistance. So just like everything else, the outputs are only as good as the quality of the inputs. So, this reporting that we're hoping to do after the end of this year, or this permit year, so by June 30th, will give us a pretty good idea of who needs more technical assistance.
July 30th. Yeah? July 30th.
Oh, July 30,
I
sorry.
think that's
Thank
worth
you.
noting. So folks that are, and this falls on me too, make sure your BMPs, everything's in there. Because he's gonna be running they're gonna be running their analysis. I'm hoping after July 30th, right?
Yes.
And I think that'll be interesting to see. And those are, yeah, it'll be interesting to see.
And so what we'll end up doing is after we run those analyses, we'll convene a PTAP meeting where, we can discuss general needs. And certainly since I don't think we're gonna turn it in, we're gonna try to keep it on a learning level. So we'll just report broad outcomes from the analysis about, where we need to work, and then maybe individually reach out to communities to provide technical assistance.
Great.
Sally, does that sound about right? Yeah, please weigh in and touch on anything I might have missed.
It does. The only thing maybe to mention is that we did go to Exeter recently and we did some one-on-one tech assistance there with staff and also expert consultants, and that was good. So, we're available to do that kind of stuff for municipalities.
And then also worth noting is your Credit for Growing Green initiative, which is focusing on sweeping and leaf debris pickup, but that has made progress, and it just shows that folks have an idea of something that they think should be credited through the PTAP. There's a process to go through to.
Yeah, so I'll just briefly say that you open that door it's really exciting because we've always, street sweeping and leaf collection is one of the things that has been really intriguing. There's USGS data out of Wisconsin that shows over like 70 to 80% of the phosphorus load, and we're finding that similar trends for nitrogen occurs during the fall season as we get organic material deposition on the leaves. So that, currently we're just assessing that load across the entire year, and we're not differentiating it by season. But we're finding in the fall, if we can focus more on leaf collection operation, that's a larger bite out of the load reduction apple from a non-structural BMP like street sweeping for both phosphorus and nitrogen. So we're working with an expert panel right now to update those credits. And so they will likely be these new credits that will involve a measured approach in addition to a modeling approach for nitrogen reductions from these activities will likely be in the next permit. And the exciting thing is because we're using common accounting metrics, we can automatically and easily integrate that into our processes and update everything that's been put in. So it's really a nod to the benefits of doing it all the same way. And it's such that when improvements come down the line, we can integrate that into our processes very easily. And we envision similar things happening for fertilizer control. As you know, there's no nitrogen reduction credits right now currently for fertilizer control, but we know that's the next thing to really address. So really exciting times.
All right, great. Good. Anything else, Sally?
No,
So do you folks, Sally or Jamie, do you think you could just take a read through what's written and make sure it reflects where we are?
Absolutely. And it's very, and like I said, it's very minor and really very like tense and changing will to has or stuff like that. So nothing substantial is changing, and we're kind of, maybe I should have started with we're on track and pause for comments or questions.
Great, thank you. All right, moving on to C, overall source reduction. I did mention at the beginning of this, we're not going to get into the specific plans, but Renee Bordeaux is here. And Renee, I'm hoping, are you sticking with us an hour and a half? Renee? I'm sorry, long meeting. Do you want to talk about any of the work that, some of the work that you did and some of the potential ideas for some of the smaller communities?
Yeah, so thanks, Gretchen. So myself and Kyle Pimentel from the Stratford Regional Planning Commission, with help from Gretchen and Sally, we had a discussion about how we might be able to engage some of these smaller communities within MAM who maybe don't have more developed nitrogen control plans that some of the larger communities have. So with the most recent Clean Water SRF grant funding that was released, we submitted 2 applications, one for the town of Milton and one for the town of Rollinsford, to create a nitrogen source identification report for each of those communities. So what that would really detail is would provide sort of more specific projects, locations, load reductions, schedules for implementation, and sort of what they might be expected to see for nitrogen removal over the course of the Great Bay General Permit over the next 4 years. So initially we want to submit them as a joint application and sort of leverage those resources, but with the timing of it, we found that it might be a little bit difficult to get buy-in from both communities to sort of share resources and how that would look. So we submitted them separate, but did put a qualifier in our application that ideally it would make more sense from a logistical standpoint to do them at the same time under a single grant. But again, we just submitted the preliminary application, and if it gets selected for future funding, we'll work out a lot of the details with specificity on exactly what that scope of work would look like and how that arrangement would move forward. So.
Great, thank you. So I think that's something we've been talking a lot about, and I know there's other smaller communities that maybe sort of take advantage of the work that they're doing and use it to build your own plans. Any questions for Renee?
To whom is the grant application being made?
It was to the state SRF,
SRF.
yeah,
Is that
SRF
the
right now.
set aside you guys have for planning?
It's, yeah, there's a stormwater planning component to the Clean Water SRF coming in. Yep. So go through that. Deb Wizzo.
Yeah, definitely so. And it's one of those things that once it's been conceptualized, as other grant funding sources become available, we can maybe build on that. Renee?
Gretchen, I'll just add one additional thing to that. Is that, our intent is too that, we would have products delivered from that grant that would be easily adaptable for other small communities that are interested in developing nitrogen source identification reports. So, our ideal is like we would work with these 2 communities, but other communities, like for instance, Newfields, who's in the room or something, who maybe doesn't have a developed plan yet, could potentially utilize the tools we have and develop a plan for themselves.
Great, thank you. And really, thank you for sticking around and talking about that. I think it's a really exciting project that you guys are taking on, and it'll be with the SRPC, which is a regional entity. So we're glad that they were able to kind of step in and take on that role. Yes.
Sally, is that what you and Jennifer Ron, we talked about for Newfields for the nitrogen reduction plan? I guess some funding.
Yeah, I think Jennifer did reach out to me about something like that. Yep, to take the hotspot data that we produce and to mine that, and then she would work with you all to figure out locations for potential management opportunities and then package it into a plan.
Okay, I'll talk a little bit more
Yeah,
about it.
absolutely. I kind of don't know where that's at right now. So since I talked to her, but yep.
Thanks.
Definitely.
Yeah, go ahead, Melissa.
Were you about to move on from this section?
Unless you want to, but
No,
no.
I just, I guess I have a question.
Please.
One of the elements of one of the points in the CLF letter to EPA was about the, kind of the lack of consistency in the nitrogen, in the appendix D, basically, sort of how municipalities are planning their nitrogen reductions, much less how they're accounting for them. And I'm wondering whether there's going to be, any additional guidance or effort to kind of make a more consistent way of, going forward to develop nitrogen control plans so that, it's a little easier to assess how communities are progressing against benchmarks and, even like the units of how nitrogen reductions are are described and measured. And again, the appendix D elements are kind of laundry lists, but not really, in some cases, not real nitrogen control plans. But I should throw that question out there. That was one of the elements of CLFs. Whether it's EPA, which we want, which has been relayed to the municipalities.
It's funny because I've sort of had my head in the way that we've done it in Appendix D, with the way that it was set up kind of between the three largest communities. So I hadn't really taken a step back at whether that's the best way to do it, which is kind of the project. I don't have Appendix D right in front of me. It outlines the project, the year, and then sort of the total load potential reduction, idea of reduction, and then I think there's comments about status update and things like that. So that was how I had always envisioned these plans going, but I guess that's definitely worth conversation of like whether it's a different way to set up a nitrogen reduction plan. I don't know.
I would just jump in here. This is Jamie. I think that's a great point. I just would say, and I didn't make a comment because I'm very confident that you'll do this with Gretchen and Sally governing this. But we've brought the nitrogen source identification reports for all the permitted communities under the MS4 to a very, very mature place. And I would just say that we should be building on that to develop this consistency that Melissa's discussing. So up till now, for the communities not within MAM that have already committed these, as Gretchen was saying, in their CIP, and we're talking about just developing a plan. We have developed nitrogen source identification reports for municipally owned lands. And that's where we stopped because that was pretty easy and it's the most actionable areas, focusing on impervious cover on municipally owned lands, just to get the process started. So we didn't get into commercial property or any private property for that matter. And that really stems from a lot of the EPA comments on the Exeter and Newmarket consent orders. They challenged them to be, to focus on municipally owned lands first. So I would just add that it would be great to see future projects build on the consistency we've already developed. Because we're all using the same methods. We're all assessing this in the same way. There's really no reason that we can't be consistent.
That's right. And that we use that whole setup to do a, it's a kind of a less deep dive than what the nitrogen general permit requires, but for the MS4 communities, that's a general nitrogen source identification reports. But yes, that is a good point. We're starting from that, as you say, relatively mature point with the.
Yeah, those reports can be leveraged for this
Right.
work, for sure.
Right.
And I think as far as the units of measurement too, Melissa, I mean, the PTAP, the way PTAP quantifies load reductions for nitrogen is by using EPA's performance curve. So that's a consistent thing. So anyone who's putting their data into PTAP is going to be using the same quantification method to show reductions for stuff that they've implemented, and it's consistent with what EPA has in the MS4 permit. So I don't know if that answers your question about units of measurement, if that's where you were headed, but, and I don't know if Jamie, you want to add to that?
I think that may be an outcome of a year's worth of maturity of this permit. That, the adaptive management plan that was submitted a year ago was done maybe in some haste because of the compressed timeline, and that, given a year out, there's a way to use those curves and shared benchmark, shared metrics for identifying load reductions from these activities. The other point I would say is, like, for example, I believe Rochester was doing hotspot mapping, which was part of their adaptive management plan. To what extent does that hotspot mapping now drive, the nitrogen reduction activities that are either already underway in the city or will be part of the next round of commitments under the adaptive management plan. So I guess that's sort of the, and I think Jamie, you noted that there's a lot of that information available. But you know, so how does that integrate in terms of, you know, the plan going forward for the next 4 years?
To your comment about the haste, you're absolutely right. And even putting in those lists that we were doing, I think you're absolutely right. When you revisit it, we're consistent with the metrics that the PTAP was using. You know, you've had a year, so you know, more solidified the lists, use the hotspot data that you have. I think by virtue of just having that process go forward, I think you're going to get a tighter product. I think you're going to get to see clearer, you know, where the reductions are going to come from, and you can, you know, a better sense of what those reductions are actually going to be. It is a little bit to be seen, I know, but you know, I know at least the 3 big communities, and Dennis, you've expressed interest in doing this for Newington as well, as really having that data cleaned up and ready to discuss in September. And the 3 largest communities owe that data 2 weeks prior to the meeting to be distributed. So, you know, everyone should be really pulling that together and tightening it up for that next round of review.
Yeah, and one last comment from me. This is Jamie. Just because we have the benefit of Mel sitting in the room, that in the working group, so between the MS4 communities and the Great Bay communities, we see the intersections and congruencies between the MS4 permit and the general nitrogen permit. And we're working to integrate those where and when we can. So I think Gretchen, you had mentioned earlier, and I second this, as much as we can kind of synergize reporting, that helps us communicate the synergies that exist, because there are some MS4 permits that permittees that are within the watershed that don't fall under the general permit, but we want to get them engaged as well. And so the more we can integrate these and create common reporting frameworks and timelines, that the easier it is to communicate that we're all talking about the same thing.
Yep, I'll take over. Thanks, Jamie. All right, well, we'll move on. I think that was good conversation. And that is going to be the topic of our September meetings, all of this. So we'll look at the PTAP work, and we'll look at our nitrogen reduction plans and dive through. So moving on to item D, process for comprehensively evaluating scientific and methodological issues. And then yeah, let's do D. So Kala, that's you again.
Yes, that is all happening. With regard to the estuary, that's sort of PREP's purview, but there's, you know, I was just listening to that statement, Gretchen, there's so much other science that is really, other people need to be, like, just, you know, listening to Jamie's presentation, new science related to how much nitrogen loading comes in leaf litter. So it's not all PREP, although I'm the one who's speaking right now. I just want to make sure that that's understood. We're really looking at how the estuary is responding to all things we cannot control, and then the things we can control, these best management practices. So that's a long way of saying, yeah, we're on track.
No, Kala, this section, you're absolutely right that Jamie is doing a lot of science and research on the loading, but this is more the geared towards ultimately the goal, which is outlined at 5, which is getting towards this TMBL or TMBL alternative. And that is really the science of the I don't know how to say it, but the way the bay is reacting, so not the upstream, but the downstream. So I think that's this section. Not to put it all in, but you know, and then I just want to make sure we've got like, we have names and people doing, you know, Judd Kenworthy, and was talking about bringing on some additional external experts. I know those experts have been selected and brought on, so there is some updating through here that could happen. Sorry to cut you off there. I just wanted to.
Yeah, no, I agree with what you've said. I can update all that in the manual, or the plan rather, as I go through on the other topics we've already discussed. As you've pointed out, we've got the experts. They're very much involved in many different aspects. You're right that one thing that we're really focusing on, I think a nice way to put it, Gretchen, is the estuarine response.
There you go.
Right? So we've got all the things that we're doing, and then all the things that climate is doing. And then they kind of come together, and then we have this estuarine response. And that's what we're trying to keep track of, and continue to really figure out, well, what can we do about it? And that's really going to come from a lot of different places. It's coming from this new project, the Eelgrass Resilience Project. It's coming from continuing to look at older data and do more sophisticated analyses of older data. Now that we keep adding year after year after year, we get more and more able to really look at what's been going on in the past and try to understand that as a way to model what could happen in the future. So everything is progressing. I'll just remind folks that once the Eelgrass Resilience Project is done around 2025, late 2024, you know, we're going to have to put, a lot of people are going to have to put their heads together to say, okay, what's next? TMDL alternative, and PREP can be part of that conversation from a science standpoint, but we tend to be non-regulatory. So it'll have to be other folks who are really leading the charge on taking the science we've done over the last, well, over the next 2 or 3 years, and turning that into appropriate regulation.
Agreed. I know. Section E, I think you guys are not part of, although you'll be part of informing the conversation for sure.
Yeah.
But I just want to make sure it, you know, reading through, we're going to talk about like, it talks about assuming that NOAA decides to fund the aforementioned PREP proposal. So all of that stuff that just needs to be updated.
Yep.
But in general, are there any substantial updates that you need to make?
No, not at all.
Okay.
And just a reminder, if folks who have the time want to stick around and see just a couple of quick videos of how things are looking, I could show those to you.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Let's wrap this up. So I know a couple of people have to get going in the next 6 minutes, but all right. So Kala, if you can take a look at doing that, I'm going to review when you make modifications, and depending on whether they're really anything substantive, we can determine whether we need to do another vote before submission of the revised adaptive management plan. Because this is the only piece that I think does have some changes to it. Just because you've got different funding from your projects have sort of had a year's worth of development.
Yep, I agree.
With that, any other, sorry to wrap this up really quickly, but any other questions and comments on the review of the adaptive management plan? Okay, then move on to item number 7, stakeholder comment. Any comments? Hearing none, I'll move on to 8, which is public comment. Anyone wishing to speak? Okay, any other business? Item number 9. Silence, let's schedule next meeting. So September, let's definitely put September on the books and then I'll reach out if we have to have an emergency one to approve.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When does the budget season start? Like this adjustment to testing funds for some small
In the fall.
community? So are we gonna have some initial numbers
You
in
will.
September?
We can do, so the
You get what I'm
communities,
saying?
yeah, so the communities that have not put in yet for this year.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're like, are you in town meeting? Is that how?
Yeah. Newington is a-
So you would, if you needed right now to hold a
Well, I
number,
think we're gonna be about the same.
Yeah.
But, okay.
that's right, and that's the same thing that I've said to a couple other things, I think Chris Jacobs, who said the same thing to do. If you need a number right now, because you're putting together budgets or even the ship sailed on that, the numbers that were approved last year are fine for those communities. The conversation for funding really goes in the fall. And then we try to have a vote and in December ahead of the new year. So, but the communities, especially the smaller ones that are, or the ones that are tied to the town meeting process, are certainly able to use last year's numbers. And we can kind of absorb a lag if we need to with that. And you know what, I'm rethinking this, I apologize, I got a little off base, but do we want to have a vote on a submission of the revised adaptive management plan pending, provided there are no substantial changes to the section D? As discussed today? I heard nothing.
So yep, it's Suzanne from Portsmouth. I would move to authorize Gretchen Young from the city of Dover to draft an updated AMP as discussed today, incorporating the changes that we've heard about and talked about, and give you Gretchen authority to call another meeting if there's anything substantive beyond what we talked today.
Thank you. A second.
We'll second that.
All right, Dennis, thank you. Then I'll do roll call vote. Suzanne Woodland,
Yes.
Chris Jacobs. I'll go to Paul Toussaint.
Yes.
All right, Chris Jacobs, are you there? All right, Dennis Messier,
Yes.
Mike Bezanson.
Yes.
Jennifer Perry, and Gretchen Young, yes. Thank you. All right, then schedule next meeting in September. Thursdays at 10. Do any of them, the 8th, the 15th, or the 22nd?
Just let me know.
Okay. How about the 15th at 10 o'clock?
Right now that works for Suzanne in Portsmouth.
All right, and who would like to host?
If you don't mind the smell, we can do it in there.
Newington it is.
It was odor free when we were there.
It's lovely. Okay, great.
At the Newington wastewater plant, 115 Gosling Road. Well, there's new.
Great, all
We'll
right,
have to get Brian to figure the TV thing out. I don't.
okay. All
I'll
right,
pay him, just let me know.
okay, done. And motion to adjourn, anyone?
So moved.
Jennifer, second? Oh my goodness, all right, Mike seconds, Suzanne
I
Woodland,
second, yeah.
Yes.
yes, Paul Toussaint,
Yes.
yes, Chris Jacobs. Not there, Dennis Messier,
Yes.
Mike Bezanson.
Yes.
Jennifer Perry.
Yes.
Gretchen Young. Yes. Thank you, Cheryl. I know that wasn't your favorite thing, but
Mike,
I
can you
appreciate
check
it.
to see if
It
it's
was difficult to say.
young lady?
There's a lot of information.
Yes,
and
okay.
I don't understand there are no
I'll be there, I'll
career-
look. I want to make sure we pay. They consult.
Who knows?